I entirely beg you, people and government of the DPR Korea, for your forgiveness. Please, I have made the worst mistake of my life.
Hey guys, Jared here. We told the tragic and insane story of Otto Warmbier, a young American tourist who was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor in a North Korean prison camp for the crime of stealing a poster. When he was finally returned to the US, he came back in a coma.
He was put in a brain-dead condition from torture, and they did nothing.
But Otto wasn't the first, and he won't be the last. In this episode, we'll look at the harrowing true stories of Americans who've been held hostage in North Korea for seemingly innocent crimes.
I am now requesting help from the American government, the citizens of America, and the world to release me from this situation.
I was pretty bruised up and bloodied, and I just tried to keep my wits about me, but I was so scared.
Do you understand what he did?
What did he do? You tell me.
Country. You tell me. Why is he held captive?
Why was this American missionary sentenced to hard labor for over 700 days in North Korea? What made this teen get himself in trouble with the North Korean law on purpose? And how did two women filming a documentary become targets in a global power play?
It was March 17th, 2009. It's just St. Patrick's Day for all of you, but it was the day that turned my life upside down.
Journalists Laura Ling and Euna Lee were filming a documentary on North Koreans who escaped their country. At 5 a.m. on a frigid March morning, Euna, Laura, their cameraman Mitch Koss, and guide Kim Song-chul crossed the frozen Tumen River on the China-North Korea border. On the North Korean side, Kim pointed toward a village where defectors stayed in safe houses. After about a minute of filming, the group turned back. Halfway across the river, all of a sudden, they heard shouting in the distance.
So we were literally standing on that frozen river when two North Korean soldiers spotted us. They chased us into China and then very violently dragged my colleague, Euna Lee, and me across that river into North Korea.
While Kim and Mitch managed to safely run away, Laura and Euna tried everything to get free. Euna desperately pleaded with her captors in Korean, but it was useless.
Everything just happened so quickly. I was eventually knocked unconscious and dragged into North Korea.
Meanwhile, in the US, Laura's sister, Lisa Ling, received an unexpected call at 2:30 a.m.
In the middle of the night, while my husband and I were sleeping, my sister's husband called and he said Laura was abducted by North Korean soldiers. And my heart just sank.
We spoke with Dr. Edward Howell, a lecturer in international relations at the University of Oxford, who has research expertise on North Korea's politics and international relations. He knows these cases inside out, and we wanted his take on exactly what happens when you're captured by North Korea.
The cases of Americans being detained in North Korea show that the North Korean penal system is brutal, that North Korea will coerce detained individuals into saying Pyongyang's version of their story. There will often be a sham trial, a forced confession in which the detainee denounces the West as pursuing a hostile policy towards North Korea, or where the detainee repents of their so-called crimes. The detainee may often denounce criticisms of North Korea's egregious human rights record in this forced confession. And this will often be followed by severe sentencing, which also includes hard labor.
The next day, Lisa snapped into action. As a fellow journalist like her sister, she called every diplomat she knew. Eventually, she got the attention of the US Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, and former Vice President Al Gore. it wasn't long before her sister and her colleague's disappearance became international news.
They are being held at a time when relations between this repressive regime and the rest of the world have never been worse.
After more than a day in cramped holding cells at a nearby army base, Euna and Laura awaited their fate. Luckily for them, they were left alone with their belongings for a short period. They quickly destroyed their notes, swallowing pages with the phone numbers of defectors they had interviewed, broke videotapes, and deleted footage, right under the guards' noses.
So they were both journalists, and they were said to have been reporting on human trafficking on the border between North Korea and China. And this is already not a risk-free topic. We all know that North Korea is one of the world's most tightly controlled societies.
After several weeks, Laura and Euna were separated, blindfolded, cuffed, and driven to a new location. They were now prisoners in Pyongyang. Then came the lengthy interrogations. No matter how much Laura and Euna claimed their innocence, the North Korean authorities wouldn't budge.
Every day was like a psychological battle. The interrogator had me sit at a table 6 days a week and had me writing down about my journey, my work over and over until I wrote down the confession that they wanted to hear.
In their eyes, Laura and Euna were spies trying to overthrow the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea, also known as DPRK.
One day my interrogator came in and he was carrying a file, and it was all about my sister and the project she had worked on. He was very upset, very suspicious, and he immediately accused both Lisa and me of trying to bring down the North Korean government.
What is common across the vast majority of the instances we have seen thus far is that North Korea accuses these individuals of claiming to have engaged in subversive actions against the North Korean state.
Laura was told, if you confess, there may be forgiveness. If you don't, bad things will happen. The thought of being shot by a firing squad crossed her mind. It was clear that they had no other choice but to confess. 3 months later, after wistfully counting the days in their holding cells, a trial date was set for the two journalists. On June 4th, 2009, Laura and Euna were sentenced to 12 years of hard labor, 2 years for trespassing, and 10 years for hostile acts.
The judge shouted, "No forgiveness, no appeal." And I just clutched on to the podium. I was standing at a podium and I just clutched onto it to keep from falling over.
Shortly after their sentencing, they were taken to a hospital for medical testing. The reason? They had to determine if they were fit for labor. Laura had a history of painful ulcers, so the North Korean doctors gave her an endoscopy with no anesthesia. Absolutely brutal. Sure enough, they found an ulcer. They decided to keep Laura under medical detention until she got better. Euna, on the other hand, passed the medical tests and was moved to a guarded guest house. Their communication with the outside world was limited, but they were both allowed a few phone calls and even got to read letters from home.
Getting letters from my family, I memorized each and every word.
Behind the scenes, the US was scrambling for a way to bring them home. There were no diplomatic ties with North Korea, and negotiations were delicate. One wrong move could make things worse. Both Laura and Euna's families appealed to the regime that they should be freed on humanitarian grounds, emphasizing the fact that Euna had a young daughter at home and that Laura was suffering from a serious medical condition with her ulcer. Then came a breakthrough. North Korea offered a deal. They would consider releasing the journalists, but only if a high-profile American envoy personally came to retrieve them. After the DPRK turned down Al Gore, among other high-ranking officials, the Obama administration decided to send someone North Korea respected, former President Bill Clinton. On August 4th, 2009, 5 months after Euna and Laura were captured, Clinton flew to Pyongyang on a secret mission. North Korea rolled out the red carpet. Clinton met with Kim Jong-il, had dinner, posed for photos, and was wise to not mention any politics like denuclearization. Meanwhile, Laura and Euna had no idea what was happening, until one day, after what seemed like a hopeless eternity, they were told to pack their things.
And then suddenly we were told that we were going to a meeting We were taken to a location. When we walked in through the doors, we saw standing before us President Bill Clinton.
It was real. Clinton had secured a special pardon, but not through formal diplomacy, but as a private citizen. No apologies, no deals, just a quiet agreement to take them home.
When North Korean state media announced their release, they used this as an opportunity to reinforce Pyongyang's worldview of the US as a hostile power. This has long been North Korea's worldview towards the United States ever since the Korean War. And this report made clear how Clinton apologized to Kim Jong-il for the hostile acts committed by these two American journalists against North Korea after illegally intruding into it.
That same day, Euna and Laura boarded a private jet bound for California. Their entire ordeal lasted 140 days. They returned home as heroes, but also survivors of a terrifying political standoff.
To our loved ones, friends, colleagues, and to the complete strangers with the kindest of hearts who showed us so much love and sent us so many positive thoughts and energy, we thank you.
While their lives were back to normal quickly, it wouldn't be long before another American was captured. And this time, the DPRK wasn't so forgiving.
Yes, I'm serving a 15-year sentence right now, and I've been going back and forth from hospital to the labor camp for the last year and a half.
As an American evangelical Christian missionary born in South Korea, Kenneth Bae represented everything North Korea despised: Christianity, South Koreans, and Americans. In 2006, Kenneth and his family moved to China and created a tourism company called Nations Tour that, as Bae put it, brought 300 Christian tourists from 17 different nations over 23 trips to North Korea to pray and worship. 6 years of tours later, on November 3rd, 2012, Bae was arrested and charged with overthrowing the government. This seems to be a common theme. Now, technically, the North Korean Constitution does allow for freedom of religion. But in reality, the only true religion that was allowed at the time was worshiping the Kim family. When Kenneth was brought in by the authorities, they began torturing him both physically and psychologically. They beat him, threatened to cut off his head and bury him so no one could ever find him. And if he didn't cooperate, he'd be charged as a war criminal and shot in the street. Like Laura and Euna, Kenneth Bae had no other choice but to cooperate and sign a forced confession. After a short trial, he was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor and was sent to a special camp strictly for foreigners. He was the first American prisoner to be sent to a labor camp since the Korean War. Bae was forced to work intense physical labor, from carrying rocks, shoveling coal, to tending the fields, all in 100-degree heat in the summer and 1.4 degrees in the winter. He did this 6 days a week, rain or shine, for over 10 hours a day.
I had to sleep with the light on and got bitten by the mosquitoes and other insects all night long. My back and hand hurt severely. I woke up every hour. So I suffer terribly.
His meals were meager: a bowl of rice and some broth, maybe a few vegetables if he was lucky, about 3 times a day. In just 3 months, Kenneth lost nearly 60 pounds. He was in and out of the hospital 3 times for malnutrition.
What we see, crucially in the case of Kenneth Bae, is again typical of what we see with Americans detained in North Korea. The detained individuals make statements that support North Korea's narrative. On the 20th of January 2014, Bae actually said that he had committed a serious crime against North Korea. He admitted that the DPRK did not abuse human rights, once again supporting Pyongyang's narrative that the US and the West are liars. This is again part of North Korea's strategy when dealing with detained individuals.
Oh, and to make matters worse, they said he owed them 600 euros per night at the hospital.
My first bill for 4 months stay at the hospital came out to 100,000 euros.
Luckily for Kenneth, he didn't have to pay the bill, but we'll get to why later. When he was back in the labor camp, guards would mess with him psychologically. Every week for a year, he was told that no one remembers him and that his government had abandoned him. But this wasn't the case. After a brief chance to speak to CNN News, Kenneth's story went viral.
And your message to your family?
Well, I'm sure they're very worried about my health at this time.
More than 177,000 people petitioned President Obama to organize Bae's release. His family and friends reached out to representatives, and US diplomats worked night and day to get him home. Even former basketball star Dennis Rodman, a friend of Kim Jong-un at the time, got a little heated over Kenneth's situation.
Just say him. No, I don't give a I don't give a rat's ass what the hell you think. Do you understand what he did?
What did he do? You
in
tell
this
me.
Country.
If they said, we'll take Dennis Rodman and we'll let Kenneth Bae go, I said, you know what? I'll do that.
This brought Kenneth's story even further into the limelight. Around this time, on April 29, 2014, another American became the next catch in North Korea's web of suspicion. 56-year-old Ohio native Jeffrey Fowle visited Pyongyang as a tourist. As a man of faith, like Kenneth, he felt it was his duty to spread the word of Christianity far and wide. He deliberately left a Bible in the Chongjing nightclub in Pyongyang. A pretty bold move if you ask me. If you haven't figured it out by now, the North Korean regime doesn't take too kindly to Christianity.
One is forbidden from carrying a Bible or other religious materials. Books about Korea, drones, satellite telephones, offensive movies. These are all forbidden. And the tour groups that have long arranged tours to North Korea make this point very, very clear.
Shortly after this stunt, Fowle was arrested at the Pyongyang airport and charged with proselytism, which is a fancy word for trying to convert someone to your religion. But believe it or not, his detainment wasn't nearly as bad as Kenneth's or the two journalists we covered earlier. No hard labor, no abuse, just a relatively mild experience in a holding cell with decent food. Meanwhile, as Kenneth and Fowle served their sentence, a third American was detained. And this time, for whatever reason, it seemed that he wanted it to happen.
I am now requesting help from the American government, the citizens of America, and the world to release me from this situation.
On April 10, 2014, 24-year-old American student Matthew Todd Miller was detained in North Korea while on a sightseeing trip organized by Yuri Tours. And for context, this was during a time when the Obama administration was coordinating sanctions on North Korea as it prepared its fourth nuclear test. Immediately upon arrival in Pyongyang, Matthew did something no one expected.
The court said Miller tore up his tourist visa at Pyongyang's airport upon arrival on April 10th and admitted to wanting to experience prison life so that he could secretly investigate North Korea's human rights situation.
I prepared to violate the law of the DPRK before coming here, and I deliberately committed my crime.
Well, Miller got his wish. On September 14th, 2014, the Pyongyang Central Court found Miller guilty of, yet again, hostile acts against the DPRK and sentenced him to 6 years of hard labor. Like Kenneth before him, he was sent to a camp where he spent his day digging, moving stones, and doing other back-breaking work. As for Jeffrey Fowle, the American who left that Bible in the nightclub, after 6 months of being detained, on October 21st, 2014, the Swedish embassy in Pyongyang stepped in and negotiated his release.
He was detained for 5 months, and unusually, he was released unconditionally without a price.
Fowle was sort of the low-hanging fruit. He hadn't yet been charged. And so that's the first window of opportunity to get a citizen released, is before the formal judicial process has really kicked in.
They also facilitated the release of Merrill Newman, an 85-year-old American and a Korean War veteran who was detained a year prior for supposedly committing war crimes during his service in the 50s.
So this is a case of North Korea using a Korean War veteran to support Pyongyang's historical narrative of the Korean War, which has been long-standing and which continues to affect North Korea's foreign policy.
Newman's ordeal comes as tensions run high in the region. The secretive regime may have subdued nuclear threats for now, but refuses to back down completely.
Fowle's job as a road maintenance worker may have given him a cleaner profile in the eyes of North Korea. As for Merrill, After a forced confession and apology, he was freed on humanitarian grounds due to his age and health. But Kenneth Bae and Matthew Miller still remained detained, and tensions between the US and the DPRK were growing exponentially. In early November 2014, the US Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, personally delivered a letter from President Obama to North Korean security officials during a secret visit to Pyongyang. In the letter, Obama identified Clapper as an envoy seeking the release of the 2 US prisoners. It was a short and deliberate message with no apologies or mention of North Korea's nuclear program. Luckily for Kenneth Bae and Matthew Miller, it worked. Their sentences were cut short. They were flown home alongside Clapper on November 8, 2014. Miller had been detained for 212 days, but Kenneth suffered through 735 and took years to recuperate from the trauma. The big takeaway here? All of these Americans were used as political bargaining chips in some way during a tumultuous time in North Korea's nuclear weapons development.
North Korea wants recognition as a sovereign state, as a legitimate state, but also as a state of equal status to the United States. And so this is one reason why hostage diplomacy can form some part of bargaining strategy.
And with the recent support of Russia, things aren't looking good for any hope of diplomacy between the DPRK and America. Now, I think it's safe to say that your best course of action for avoiding being detained in North Korea is by not going there in the first place, especially if you're an American. And if you're planning on visiting their upcoming beach resort, Wonsan Kalma, don't steal posters, plant the Bible, or do any sort of funny business in the eyes of the Kim regime. For one American tourist, a risky trip to North Korea turned out to be a death sentence. We'll explore the tragic tale of Otto Warmbier in harrowing detail in another episode of How to Survive.